Autumn wind carried the scent of pine and decay as I clutched my daughter closer to my chest, her tiny fingers curled around the frayed edge of the blanket I'd managed to salvage when they cast me out. 6 months since the rejection ceremony, since my mate had looked at me with those cold eyes and declared me unworthy before the entire pack. 6 months of surviving on the fringes of territory that once felt like home, my status as a rejected Omega hanging around my neck like a brand of shame. "It's okay, little one," I whispered to Emma as she stirred against me, her silver blonde hair, so like mine, catching the last golden rays of afternoon sun. "We'll find somewhere to settle before dark." The forest grew denser as we moved away from packlands, the trees standing like silent sentinels guarding the boundaries between worlds. I'd heard whispers of unclaimed territory beyond the northern ridge, places where lone wolves sometimes carved out humble existences away from pack politics and hierarchy. That was all I wanted now. A quiet place to raise my daughter, free from the judging stares and whispered contempt. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory as I navigated through the underbrush. "An Omega's greatest strength isn't in her claws or teeth, Alara, but in her heart." She'd given me her silver pendant the day before she died, a crescent moon embracing a small star. The same pendant that now hung around my neck, a talisman against the darkness that sometimes threatened to consume me. "When everything else is stripped away, this heart will guide you home." I didn't know where home was anymore, but I knew I had to keep moving. The first drops of rain began to fall as the light faded. Emma whimpered, sensing my anxiety as I scanned our surroundings for shelter. The territorial markers had changed, the scents unfamiliar and potent with warning. I'd strayed too far north, I realized with growing dread. These weren't unclaimed lands, but the edges of the northern kingdom, ruled by the most feared alpha in generations. Stories of the Northern Alpha King circulated even in our isolated pack. His ruthlessness in battle, his unforgiving nature, his pack's prosperity earned through blood and iron will. No Omega would find sanctuary here, especially not one bearing the scent of another pack, another alpha. "We'll turn back," I murmured to Emma, though exhaustion weighed on me like stones. We hadn't eaten properly in days. The small pouch of provisions I'd managed to gather was nearly empty, and game had been scarce as winter approached. But the alternative, being discovered here, seemed far worse than hunger. That's when I heard it. A small, pitiful whimper carried on the wind. I froze, instincts warring within me. The sound came again, unmistakably the cry of a young pup in distress. Every fiber of my being urged me to keep moving, to protect my own child first. But the Omega in me, the nurturer, couldn't ignore the sound. I hesitated only a moment before changing direction, following the cries deeper into the forest. The rain intensified, soaking through my worn cloak as I navigated between massive tree trunks and over moss-covered stones. Emma remained remarkably quiet, as if understanding the gravity of our situation, her wide blue eyes taking in the shadowed forest around us. I found the pup huddled beneath the hollow of a fallen oak, his small body trembling with cold and fear. He couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old enough to shift, but young enough to be terrified of being separated from his pack. His fur was dark as midnight with a distinctive silver marking across his muzzle, an unusual coloration that tugged at some distant memory I couldn't quite place. "It's okay," I said softly, crouching down despite the mud soaking through my already damp clothes. "I won't hurt you," the pup growled, a sound so incongruous with his small size that I nearly smiled despite our precarious situation. "Brave little one, aren't you?" I set Emma down carefully on a relatively dry patch of earth beneath the hollow, keeping her wrapped in her blanket. "Are you lost?" The growl subsided as the pup assessed me, his intelligent eyes seeming to recognize that I posed no threat. After a moment he shifted, the shimmer of transformation revealing a small boy with tousled black hair and tear-stained cheeks. "My papa will find me," he declared with all the conviction a child could muster, though his trembling lip betrayed his uncertainty. "He's the strongest wolf in the whole world." "I'm sure he is," I agreed, removing my damp cloak and wrapping it around his shoulders. "And I'm sure he's looking for you right now. But until he finds you, how about we get warm and dry? It's not good for puppies or babies to be out in the rain." He glanced at Emma, curiosity momentarily overriding fear. "Is she a shifter too?" Yes, I answered, the familiar ache rising in my chest. Though she's too young to change yet. Too young to know that her mother's rejection from the pack would mark her too, that the life I'd once imagined for her had been shattered before she'd even taken her first breath. I'm Theo, the boy offered, moving closer to examine Emma, who gurgled and reached for him with chubby fingers. I'm Alara, I said. And this is Emma. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Theo flinched, instinctively moving closer to me. I gathered both children under the meager shelter of the hollow, using my body heat to warm them as the storm intensified. We need better shelter, I murmured, more to myself than to Theo. Night was falling rapidly, and with it, temperatures would drop. A wet, cold night in the forest could be deadly for young ones. There's a cave, Theo said suddenly, pointing deeper into the forest. Papa showed me. It's not far. Every instinct warned me against venturing further into northern territory, but the alternative seemed worse with each passing minute. Can you lead us there? Theo nodded solemnly, slipping his small hand into mine with surprising trust. I gathered Emma back into my arms, and we set off through the downpour, guided by a child of the very kingdom I'd been desperate to avoid. The cave was indeed close, its entrance partially hidden by a curtain of hanging vines and moss. Inside, it was blessedly dry, the floor covered with fine sand rather than the mud I'd expected. More surprising still were the signs of occasional use. A stack of dry firewood against one wall, what appeared to be a rough shelf carved into the stone. Papa brings me here sometimes, Theo explained, his voice echoing slightly in the cave's interior. He says it's our special place. I hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware we were intruding on someone's private retreat. Theo, whose special place is this? I don't want to trespass. It's okay, he assured me with childlike certainty. Papa won't mind. He says we should always help people who need it. His words didn't entirely reassure me, but the storm had reached its full fury outside. I had little choice. Moving quickly, I set about making the space habitable, using the firewood to start a small fire in what was clearly a well-used fire pit. The warmth spread gradually through the cave, and I laid Emma on my lap while I used a corner of her blanket to dry Theo's hair. Your papa sounds like a wise man, I said, trying to keep the conversation light as I assessed our situation. We were safer from the elements, but now I worried about the owner of this retreat returning to find unexpected guests. He's the wisest and the strongest, Theo declared proudly. Everyone has to do what he says. Is that so? I smiled at his innocent boasting. And what does your mother think about that? His face fell instantly, and I regretted the question. I don't have a mother, he said quietly. She died when I was born. Papa says she watches me from the moon. I'm sorry, Theo, I whispered, my heart aching for this child who'd never known a mother's love. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed his hair back from his forehead, a gesture my own mother had often used to comfort me. I'm sure she does watch you, and I bet she's very proud of how brave you are. He leaned into my touch, the simple gesture of comfort seeming to break through a dam. Suddenly he was crying, not the frightened tears of a lost child, but the deep, racking sobs of one who'd held grief inside far too long. I gathered him against me, cradling both him and Emma as the storm raged outside. It's all right to cry, I murmured, rocking gently. Even the bravest wolves cry sometimes. Eventually his sobs subsided, and he pulled back, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Papa doesn't cry, he said with absolute certainty. Perhaps not where you can see, I replied carefully, but I imagine he has moments of sadness too. Theo seemed to consider this revolutionary idea. While I set about making our temporary shelter more comfortable, I found a small bundle of dried herbs hanging from the rough shelf, medicinal plants that could be steeped in hot water. Using a small pot that was stored with the firewood, I melted snow from outside and made a simple tea. This will warm us from the inside, I explained, letting it cool before offering some to Theo. I dripped a tiny amount onto my finger for Emma, who sucked it eagerly, her small face brightening at the sweet taste. As we sat in the firelight, Theo gradually relaxed, telling me stories about his pack with the unguarded openness of childhood. I listened, learning more about the Northern Kingdom than any outsider had likely ever known. though filtered through a child's understanding. He spoke of his father with unwavering admiration, of the pack's territories that stretched farther than anyone can run in a whole day, of the massive stone fortress that served as the pack's central gathering place. "And where were you today?" I asked gently. "When you got separated from your pack?" Theo's expression turned guilty.
"Papa was busy with the council. I was supposed to stay with Kai. He's my guard. But I wanted to explore." His lower lip trembled again. "Papa will be angry." "I think he'll be more relieved than angry," I assured him, though I wondered if that was true. Alphas, in my experience, ruled their packs with strict discipline. A child who'd wandered off might face stern consequences, even one as young as Theo. The storm showed no signs of abating as night deepened. Emma had fallen asleep on my lap, her small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Theo fought sleep valiantly, his eyelids growing heavier as he insisted between yawns that his father would find him soon. "Why don't we rest while we wait?" I suggested, arranging my cloak and Emma's blanket to create a makeshift bed near the fire. "Your papa might not be able to track you until the rain stops." Finally he nodded, crawling onto the improvised bedding and curling up like the pup he was. I settled Emma beside him, smiling as Theo instinctively curved his body around hers in protective instinct. I stayed awake, adding wood to the fire and listening to the storm. My grandmother's pendant felt warm against my skin, almost as if responding to some unseen energy. In the morning, I would need to help Theo find his way back to his pack, a dangerous proposition for a rejected Omega carrying the scent of another territory, but I couldn't abandon a child, especially one who'd shown such trust. As I gazed into the flames, a new scent cut through the smoky air of the cave. Powerful, primal, unmistakably alpha. My head snapped up just as a massive shadow fell across the cave entrance. The northern Alpha King stood silhouetted against the night, rain streaming from his broad shoulders, his eyes reflecting the firelight like burning gold coins. Power radiated from him in palpable waves, freezing me in place as effectively as a physical blow. Our eyes locked across the fire, and in that instant, I knew my fate had just irrevocably changed. Time seemed suspended as the Alpha's gaze traveled from me to the sleeping children. I instinctively shifted to place myself between him and them, though I knew the gesture was futile. If he wanted to harm us, my fragile Omega body would provide no resistance against his strength. "Please," I whispered, the word barely audible above the crackling fire and storm outside. The boy was lost. I only wanted to keep him safe until morning. The Alpha stepped fully into the cave, water dripping from his dark clothing onto the sandy floor. In the firelight, I could see him clearly now, tall and powerfully built, with features that seemed carved from stone. His hair was as black as Theo's, with striking silver at the temples that matched the boy's unusual markings in wolf form. The resemblance was unmistakable. "You found my son," he said, his voice deep and controlled, revealing nothing of his thoughts. I nodded, unable to form words as his scent filled the small space. Pine and snow and something wild that made my heart race with primal recognition. This was no ordinary Alpha, but one of the purest bloodlines. His power ancient and undiluted. He moved closer, and I pressed back against the cave wall, expecting anger or violence for my trespass. Instead, he knelt beside the sleeping children, one large hand hovering over Theo's head, before gently smoothing the boy's tousled hair. "He was frightened," I managed to say, finding my voice. Cold and wet from the storm, I couldn't leave him. The Alpha's eyes returned to mine, and something unreadable flickered in their depths. "No, you couldn't." His gaze dropped to Emma, taking in her delicate features, the silver blonde hair so unlike his son's darkness. "Your child?" "Yes," I answered, fighting the urge to snatch her away from his scrutiny. "My daughter." He studied me then, his assessment so thorough I felt laid bare before him. I knew what he saw, a thin, exhausted Omega with the fading mark of rejection at my throat, clothes worn and patched, the unmistakable scent of another territory clinging faintly to my skin despite months of separation. "You're far from home, Omega," he observed, the statement carrying unspoken questions. "I have no home," I replied, the truth slipping out before I could consider diplomacy. "Not anymore." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Rejected?"
I touched the mark at my throat unconsciously. Yes. And the child's father? Wanted nothing to do with either of us, I said, bitterness seeping into my voice despite my efforts to remain neutral. He found a more suitable mate, one who could give him sons. The Alpha's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. So you wander with an infant through hostile territory in the onset of winter. Put that way, my desperation sounded like madness. I was searching for unclaimed lands, I explained. I didn't mean to trespass in your kingdom. When the storm passes, we'll be on our way. He regarded me silently for a long moment, the only sound the gentle breathing of the children and the howling wind outside. Finally, he spoke, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will come to the fortress. Fear spiked through me. I can't. It wasn't a request, he interrupted, though his voice remained measured. The storm will last through tomorrow. The temperatures will drop further. You and your child wouldn't survive another night in these woods. My grandmother's pendant seemed to pulse against my skin as I weighed my limited options. Refusing an alpha of his stature wasn't merely unwise, it was potentially fatal. Yet bringing Emma into the heart of an unfamiliar pack carried its own dangers. I give you my protection, he added, correctly reading my hesitation. No harm will come to you or your daughter while you're under my roof. The formal declaration startled me. Protection from an alpha king was no small thing, not offered lightly or without significance. My exhausted mind couldn't comprehend why he would extend such a courtesy to a stranger, a rejected Omega from another territory no less. Why? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. His eyes flicked to his sleeping son, then back to me. You protected what's mine. I repay my debts. It was a simple calculus of honor then. Not kindness, but obligation. Somehow that was easier to accept than pity. Thank you, I said quietly. We'll accept your protection until the storm passes. He nodded once, then moved with unexpected gentleness to lift Theo into his arms. The boy stirred but didn't wake, instinctively curling against his father's chest. I gathered Emma, wrapping her securely in her blanket. She blinked awake momentarily, her tiny hand reaching up to touch my face before she drifted back to sleep, trusting completely in my protection. A trust I prayed I wasn't betraying by following this dangerous man. Stay close, the Alpha instructed as we stepped into the tempest. The path isn't visible in this weather. I clutched Emma tightly and followed him into the darkness, the rain instantly soaking through my thin clothing. The wind cut like knives, and I hunched over Emma, using my body to shield her from the worst of it. The Alpha moved with confidence through the forest, navigating by some inner sense, even as the storm obliterated any visible path. After what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, lights appeared through the trees, warm, golden pinpricks against the black night. As we drew closer, the massive structure emerged from the darkness, a fortress of stone and timber that seemed to rise organically from the mountainside. Guards materialized from the shadows as we approached, their surprise evident even through the downpour when they recognized their Alpha and the unexpected company he brought. My king, one began, only to be silenced by a sharp look. Prepare quarters in the east wing, the Alpha commanded, and find dry clothes, food. His gaze flicked to Emma in my arms. Milk for the infant. Inform Helena her services will be needed. The guard nodded sharply and disappeared inside, while another stepped forward to escort us. I followed numbly, overwhelmed by the scale of the fortress as we passed through towering wooden doors into a great hall. Fires blazed in massive hearths, casting dancing shadows across stone floors and timber beams. Pack members stopped their activities to stare as we passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility at the presence of an outsider. I kept my eyes lowered, an instinctive Omega response to potential threat, and clutched Emma closer as we ascended a wide staircase and moved deeper into the fortress. Alexander? A woman's voice, sharp with concern, cut through the hushed whispers that followed our progress. We've had search parties out since sunset. Where did you find him? I glanced up to see an older woman approaching, her silver-streaked hair arranged elegantly despite the late hour, her bearing regal. A beta, I realized. Likely a high-ranking one given her familiar tone with the Alpha King. He was safe, the Alpha Alexander responded. This Omega found him and sheltered him from the storm. The woman's keen eyes assessed me thoroughly, taking in my bedraggled appearance and the child in my arms. To her credit, her expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "I'll take the boy," she offered, reaching for Theo. "No." Alexander's refusal was quiet, but absolute. "He stays with me tonight. See that our guests are settled in the East Quarters. They have my protection." A flash of surprise crossed her features before she composed herself with practiced grace. "Of course, this way, please." I followed her through torchlit corridors, acutely aware of the wet trail I left on polished stone floors and the stares of pack members we passed. Emma stirred against me, whimpering softly at the unfamiliar surroundings. "Hush, little one," I murmured. "We're safe for now." The woman, I still didn't know her name, led us to a set of heavy wooden doors, which she pushed open to reveal a spacious chamber. A fire already blazed in the hearth, and steaming water filled a copper tub set before it. Fresh clothing lay folded on a massive bed, and a small cradle had been placed nearby. "These are the Alpha's personal guest quarters," she explained, her tone neutral, but her gaze sharp. "No one has used them in some time." The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Being housed in the Alpha's wing rather than common guest quarters would reinforce his protection to any who might question my presence. "Thank you," I said, uncertain how else to respond to such unexpected consideration. "Helena will attend you shortly. She's our healer and midwife." The woman paused at the doorway. "I am Lydia, the pack's first beta." "Ilara," I offered in return. "And this is Emma." Something softened briefly in Lydia's stern features as she looked at my daughter. "How old?" 4 months, I answered, surprised by the question. Lydia nodded as if confirming something to herself. "There will be milk and food brought up. If you need anything else, pull the bell cord by the bed." With that, she departed, leaving me alone in chambers more luxurious than any I'd ever occupied, even before my rejection. I stood dripping on expensive rugs, afraid to move and soil anything further, until Emma's increasingly insistent whimpers spurred me into action. I bathed her first in the warm water, her tiny limbs kicking with delight at the unaccustomed luxury. My own bath followed, quick but blissful after months of cold streams and hasty washes. The clean clothing fit reasonably well, simple but well-made trousers and a soft tunic that hung loosely on my frame, evidence of how much weight I'd lost during our months of wandering. A knock at the door announced the arrival of food, and Helena, the healer, a robust woman with kind eyes and capable hands. She examined Emma with professional efficiency while I ate the simple but nourishing stew and bread they'd brought. "She's underweight, but healthy otherwise," Helena pronounced, tickling Emma's stomach to produce a rare giggle that lightened my heart. "And you, my dear, are exhausted to the bone. When did you last sleep properly?" I couldn't remember. Weeks, perhaps months of vigilance had trained me to sleep lightly, always alert for danger. "That's what I thought," Helena said when I didn't answer. "Finish your food, feed your little one, and then sleep. The storm won't pass until tomorrow at earliest, and no decisions will be made until the Alpha calls council." The mention of council sent a chill through me despite the warm room. Councils determined the fate of trespassers, of Omegas without pack protection. Even with the Alpha's temporary guarantee, I knew my position was precarious. "What will happen to us?" I asked quietly. Helena's expression grew guarded. "That's for the Alpha to decide. But you brought his son safely home when others failed. That counts for something in the Northern Kingdom." She patted my hand. "Rest now. Tomorrow will come soon enough." After she left, I fed Emma with the milk they'd provided and rocked her to sleep in the cradle. Exhaustion pulled at me relentlessly, but I fought it long enough to stand at the window, watching the storm rage against the fortress walls. Somewhere in this massive structure, the Alpha King was likely making decisions about our fate. Block 3. Sleep claimed me despite my anxiety, a deep and dreamless rest unlike anything I'd experienced since my rejection. When I woke, pale winter sunlight filtered through leaded glass windows, casting geometric patterns across the stone floor. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was, reaching instinctively for Emma before my eyes found her still sleeping peacefully in the cradle. A soft knock at the door startled me. I wrapped a thick wool blanket around my shoulders before calling, "Come in." A young girl, perhaps 12 years old, entered with a tray of food and a bundle of clothing. "Good morning, miss," she said with a quick bow. "The Alpha requests your presence in the Great Hall once you've broken your fast. I've brought clothes for you and the little one." "Thank you," I replied, somewhat taken aback by the formality. "Has the storm passed?" "Yes, miss. Stopped just before dawn." She set down the tray and moved to the fireplace, adding logs with practiced efficiency. "But the snow's deep now, 2 feet at least, and still coming down." My heart sank. Even if the Alpha granted us leave to go, travel would be nearly impossible with Emma in such conditions. We were effectively trapped here until a thaw, dependent entirely on the mercy of strangers. The girl, who introduced herself as Mira, helped me dress Emma in clothes that must have been stored away from some other pack child. They were simple, but well made. Far better than the threadbare garments I'd managed to fashion during our months of wandering. For myself, she had brought a dress in deep blue wool, cut in the northern style with silver embroidery at cuffs and collar. "These are too fine," I protested, running my fingers over the delicate needlework. Mira looked confused. "The first beta said you were to be presented properly to the pack." Presented. The word sent a shiver through me. This wasn't merely a meal, but some form of formal introduction, or judgment. I dressed with trembling hands, Mira helping to arrange my hair, which had grown long during our exile. When I caught my reflection in a polished metal mirror, I barely recognized myself. The gaunt, haunted creature from yesterday had been transformed into someone who looked almost respectable, if still too thin. My grandmother's pendant still hung at my throat, incongruous with the fine clothing, but a comfort I couldn't bear to remove. I touched it for reassurance before lifting Emma into my arms and following Mira through the winding corridors of the fortress. The Great Hall was crowded when we entered, pack members filling long tables where breakfast was being served. A raised dais at one end held a massive table where the Alpha sat with what appeared to be his inner circle. Theo was there beside his father, his face lighting up when he spotted me. "Ilara," he called, waving enthusiastically. "And baby Emma." Every head turned at his exclamation, hundreds of eyes fixing on me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. I froze at the threshold, the Omega in me shrinking from such scrutiny. "Come," a voice commanded, and the crowd parted as Alexander rose from his seat, extending a hand in clear invitation. Walking the length of that hall, feeling the weight of so many stairs, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I focused on Theo's welcoming smile, on keeping my steps steady and my head high despite the instinct to cower. When I reached the dais, Alexander gestured to an empty chair at his right hand, a position of honor that caused whispers to ripple through the crowd. "Sit," he said, his voice pitched low for my ears alone. "You'll need your strength today." The cryptic statement did nothing to calm my nerves as I settled into the indicated chair, arranging Emma on my lap. A servant immediately appeared with a cushioned infant seat, which I gratefully used to prop Emma more comfortably. "Did you sleep well?" Theo asked, leaning around his father to grin at me. He showed no signs of yesterday's distress, his resilience typically childlike. "Very well, thank you," I answered with a small smile. "And you?" "Papa let me sleep in his chambers," he confided. "We haven't done that since I was little." Alexander cleared his throat, a sound that immediately silenced his son's chatter. "Eat," he directed me, indicating the plate that had been set before me. Porridge with honey, fresh bread, preserved fruits. "The council will convene after the meal." I managed a few bites despite my stomach's nervous churning, aware of the eyes still watching from the tables below. Lydia, the first beta, sat at Alexander's left, her shrewd gaze assessing me whenever she thought I wouldn't notice. When the meal concluded, servants cleared the tables with practiced efficiency. Rather than departing, however, the pack members rearranged themselves around the edges of the hall, creating an open space in the center. My pulse quickened as I recognized the formation. A judgment circle, used for pack decisions and pronouncements. Alexander stood, and immediate silence fell across the hall. Yesterday, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner. My son wandered from his escort during the council meeting. When the storm came, our trackers lost his scent. Murmurs of distress rose from the assembled wolves. Clearly, Theo's disappearance had caused significant concern throughout the pack. In the midst of this storm, an Omega from outside our territory found him, sheltered him, and cared for him until I arrived. Alexander's gaze swept the room, challenging anyone to object to my presence. For this, she and her child have my personal protection and the hospitality of our pack for as long as needed. The formal declaration should have reassured me, but something in his tone suggested there was more to come. I wasn't wrong. However, he continued, her presence raises questions that must be addressed. He turned to me then, his expression unreadable. Ilara of the Eastern Silver Mist Pack, stand and be recognized. Shock rippled through me at his knowledge of my former pack, information I hadn't shared. With trembling legs, I passed Emma to a waiting Mira and rose to my feet, feeling horribly exposed before the assembled wolves. You bear the mark of formal rejection, Alexander stated. Not a question, but a fact. Speak the circumstances of this judgment to the council. It wasn't a request, but a command, one I couldn't refuse without insulting not only the Alpha but his entire pack. Still, shame burned through me at having to lay bare my humiliation before these strangers. I was mated to Gareth, son of Alpha Daemon, I began. My voice initially weak but strengthening as ancient Omega pride rose within me. These northern wolves might judge me, but I would not cower before them. When I conceived, he was pleased. But the pregnancy was difficult. Our healer said I would likely bear only daughters, and perhaps only this one child. I paused, the memory still raw despite the months that had passed. Gareth took another mate while I was still carrying, a younger Omega from a neighboring pack. After Emma was born, he called for a rejection ceremony. His father approved it. The formal simplicity of my words belied the devastation of that day. Standing before my birth pack with my newborn daughter in my arms, hearing Gareth denounce me as inadequate, watching as the pack I'd grown up with turned their backs one by one. No one had spoken for me, not even my childhood friends. And after your rejection, Alexander prompted, his voice neutral. I was given 3 days to leave pack territory, I answered steadily. I took what I could carry and went north, seeking unclaimed lands where we might survive. A tall wolf near the front of the circle scoffed audibly. A rejected Omega and an infant female, alone in the wild? You courted death. Before I could respond, Alexander's gaze snapped to the speaker. She survived 6 months through the beginning of winter, Valen. I doubt you'd fare as well with an infant to protect. The rebuke was mild but effective, silencing the warrior immediately. The question before the council, Alexander continued, is what becomes of Ilara and her child, now that the snows have made travel impossible. Lydia stepped forward. Our laws are clear regarding trespassers, Alpha, even with the mitigating circumstances. My heart sank. Northern pack laws were notoriously harsh. Trespassers were typically given 3 options: death, imprisonment, or servitude, until reparations were made. None were acceptable outcomes with Emma to consider. I am aware of our laws, First Beta, Alexander replied, a dangerous edge entering his voice. I am also aware of my prerogative to make exceptions when circumstances warrant. The hall grew tense as Alpha and Beta locked eyes in what was clearly an ongoing power struggle. Finally, Lydia inclined her head in subtle deference. Of course, my king. What do you propose? Alexander turned to me, his golden eyes intent. You protected my son when my own guards failed. That creates a debt between us. I swallowed hard. Your protection during the storm has more than repaid any debt, Alpha King. I ask nothing more. A hint of something, approval, perhaps, flickered across his stern features. Nevertheless, Northern honor demands acknowledgement. He addressed the assembled pack again. Until the spring thaw, Ilara and her daughter will remain here as honored guests of the royal household. Theo has already grown attached to them, and his well-being is paramount. Whispers erupted around the hall, some clearly displeased with this pronouncement. A severe-looking woman near Lydia frowned openly. The child needs proper northern influences, not some rejected Eastern Omega. "Careful, Katerina," Alexander warned, his tone deceptively soft. "You speak of someone under my protection." The woman subsided, though resentment remained clear on her face. I recognized the look. She had designs on the position of alpha female, and my presence threatened that ambition somehow. It was a political dynamic I understood well from my former pack, though I couldn't fathom why she would see me as competition. "It's decided," Alexander declared, brooking no further argument. "Quarters will be prepared in the royal wing, and Alara will assist Helena in the healing rooms as compensation for the pack's hospitality." The assignment surprised me. Healing work was respected, not the menial labor I had expected to be given. Before I could process this development, Alexander turned to me once more. "There is one more matter," he said, his voice lowering. "Your former mate's actions merit response. By pack law, a male who rejects his mate while she carries his child commits a grievous offense." I shook my head quickly, alarmed by the dangerous glint in his eye. "That is Eastern pack business, Alpha King. I seek no retribution. Perhaps you should," he countered. "If not for yourself, then for your daughter, whose birthright was stolen." His words stirred something painful and long suppressed, not just grief over my rejection, but rage at the injustice done to Emma, who would grow up without a pack, without the protection and community that was her due. "What would you have me do?" I asked softly. "I have no standing to challenge pack law." Alexander's smile was cold and sharp as a winter moon. "You may not, but I do. The Northern Kingdom has long memories, Alara of Silvermist. Your grandmother once did our pack a great service. Her pendant marks you as under our ancestral protection, had you but known to claim it." My hand flew to the silver crescent at my throat, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't merely a trinket, but a symbol of alliance, one my grandmother had never explained, perhaps waiting for me to be old enough to understand its significance. "We will discuss this further in private," Alexander said, ending the public audience with a decisive gesture. "The council is dismissed." The following days passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. True to Alexander's word, Emma and I were installed in chambers within the royal wing, close enough to Theo's rooms that he could visit daily, which he did with enthusiastic regularity. The boy had formed an attachment to both of us that was as touching as it was puzzling, given the brevity of our acquaintance. "He's never taken to anyone so quickly," Helena commented, as we worked side by side in the healing rooms, sorting dried herbs for winter remedies. "Not since his mother died." I glanced up from the bundles of lavender I was binding. "How long ago was that?" 5 years now," Helena sighed, her capable hands never pausing in their work. "A difficult birth. The Queen held on long enough to name him, but nothing more. It broke something in our Alpha, though he'd never admit it. I thought of Alexander's stern countenance, the controlled power that emanated from him, the rare moments of tenderness I'd glimpsed when he looked at his son. "He seems devoted to Theo, fiercely so," Helena agreed, "which makes the boy's freedom to wander all the more surprising. Before you came, Alexander rarely let him out of sight when not attending to kingdom matters." The observation hung between us, laden with implications I wasn't prepared to examine. I focused instead on my task, grateful for work that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. The healing rooms were a sanctuary of sorts, warm, fragrant with herbs, and blessedly free of the stares and whispers that followed me elsewhere in the fortress. Not everyone had accepted Alexander's decree with grace. Katerina, I'd learned, was daughter to a powerful Beta family that had served the Northern Royals for generations. She'd been groomed since childhood as a potential match for Alexander, a union that would solidify old alliances. My arrival, and the Alpha's puzzling interest in me, had upset carefully laid plans. "Don't turn your back on that one," Lydia had warned me during one of her regular visits to check on our comfort. The first Beta had thawed somewhat toward me, perhaps seeing I had no designs on power or position. "Katerina may smile to your face, but she has her father's cunning and her mother's temper." I took the warning seriously, keeping Emma with me at all times, and accepting the guard Alexander had assigned to escort us when moving through the fortress. Bryce was a young but capable warrior who took his duty with earnest dedication, stationing himself outside our chambers at night and shadowing our movements by day. "The Alpha would have my hide if any harm came to you or the little princess," he explained when I protested the constant vigilance. The casual use of princess for Emma startled me, though I didn't correct him. Strange terminology aside, I appreciated the protection, especially after discovering small, deliberate slights. A door that should have been unlocked found latched, a meal that arrived cold, whispers that fell silent when I entered a room. Winter deepened around the fortress, snow piling higher against the walls, ice forming fantastic sculptures from the waterfall that normally flowed into the valley below. Despite the occasional tensions, there was a comfort in the routine that developed. Mornings in the healing rooms with Helena, afternoons often spent with Theo, who insisted on showing me every corner of his home with proprietary pride. Alexander himself remained an enigma. Present, but distant. I often felt his eyes on me during meals or pack gatherings, but he rarely sought direct conversation, leaving me uncertain of his true thoughts regarding our presence. The promised private discussion about my grandmother's pendant and its significance never materialized, postponed by the constant demands of leadership as winter tightened its grip on the kingdom. It was Theo who finally created opportunity for closer interaction, coming to my chambers one evening with red-rimmed eyes and a fever that had Helena clicking her tongue in concern. "Winter throat," she diagnosed, mixing a soothing tea of honey and herbs. Common enough in pups his age. Nothing serious, but uncomfortable. "I want Alara to tell me a story," Theo insisted hoarsely, casting imploring eyes in my direction. "Like she did in the cave." Helena raised an eyebrow at me. "You've been holding out, my dear. I didn't know you were a storyteller." In truth, I'd merely whispered old pack legends to distract the frightened boy during the storm, but Theo had apparently treasured the memory. "I know a few tales," I admitted. "My grandmother was keeper of stories in our pack." "Then it seems you've been assigned," Helena said with a smile, gathering her supplies. "Keep him quiet and make sure he drinks the tea. I'll check on him in the morning." Left alone with the miserable child, I settled beside his bed and began a story my grandmother had told me countless times. The tale of the first Omega wolf who had discovered healing herbs and saved her pack from a deadly fever. Theo listened with rapt attention, his discomfort temporarily forgotten as the narrative unfolded. I was so absorbed in the telling that I didn't notice Alexander's arrival until a shift in the air. A new tension, a familiar scent, made me glance toward the doorway. The Alpha stood silently watching, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it as he observed his son's captivated face. "Don't stop," Theo protested when I faltered. "What happened to the brave Omega?" I continued, my voice less steady now with Alexander's powerful presence filling the room. When the story concluded with the Omega's eventual recognition as pack healer and advisor to the Alpha, Theo sighed with satisfaction. "Another," he pleaded, even as his eyelids drooped with encroaching sleep. "Tomorrow," Alexander said, moving fully into the room. "You need rest now." Theo didn't argue, a testament to how unwell he truly felt. I rose to leave, but Alexander gestured for me to remain as he sat on the edge of the bed, placing a large hand on his son's forehead. "The fever's already dropping," I offered quietly. "Helena says it's just winter throat. Common in children." Alexander nodded, smoothing Theo's dark hair back from his face with a tenderness that contradicted his fearsome reputation. "He had it last year as well. I remember these long nights." The simple acknowledgement of shared parental experience created an unexpected bridge between us. For a moment, we weren't Alpha and Omega, king and trespasser, but simply two parents concerned for a child's comfort. When Theo finally drifted to sleep, Alexander motioned for me to follow him from the room. I hesitated, thinking of Emma alone in our chambers, but he anticipated the concern. "I've asked Helena to look in on your daughter. She was sleeping peacefully when I passed your rooms." The consideration surprised me, as did his next words. "Walk with me, Alara. There are matters we should discuss, and I've postponed them too long." He led me through quieter corridors to a part of the fortress I hadn't yet seen. A small, glass-enclosed garden, where plants somehow thrived despite the winter outside. Steam rose from pools of water that must have been fed by hot springs beneath the mountain, creating a microclimate of perpetual spring within the glass walls. "My mother created this," Alexander explained, noting my wonder. "She said even wolves need growing things in winter to remember the cycle continues."
I touched a flowering vine that climbed one of the stone columns. It's beautiful, like a piece of another season preserved. Yes. He seemed pleased by my appreciation. Few come here now. It's become something of a private retreat. The significance of his bringing me to this personal space wasn't lost on me. I waited, sensing he had purpose beyond simple conversation. "You still wear your grandmother's pendant," he observed after a moment of silence. My hand went to it reflexively. "Always. It's my last connection to her. Did she never speak of its meaning, its origin?" I shook my head. "Only that it would protect me when needed. I assumed it was a sentimental charm, nothing more." Alexander gestured to a stone bench beside one of the steaming pools, waiting for me to sit before joining me, maintaining a respectful distance that nonetheless left me acutely aware of his proximity. "That pendant was given to your grandmother by my father," he said, the revelation landing like a stone in still water. "She saved his life during the territory wars, at great risk to herself. It marks the bearer as blood ally to the Northern Royal Line, under our protection and entitled to call upon us in need." I stared at him, pieces falling into place. "That's why you've treated us with such consideration." A shadow crossed his face. "Initially, yes. Northern honor demanded recognition of the blood debt. But there's more to this situation than ancient obligations, Alara." Something in his tone sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with fear. "What do you mean?" "Your rejection was unjust by any pack's standards," he said, anger edging his words. "To cast out a mate with child violates the oldest laws of our kind. Had you come directly to us, invoked the protection of the pendant, we would have been obligated to intervene." The thought was staggering, that I might have avoided months of desperate wandering, of watching Emma grow thin and weak, of fearing each day might be our last. "I didn't know," I whispered. "No," he acknowledged. "And that ignorance nearly cost you both your lives." His jaw tightened. "It also denied Theo the care he responds to so naturally. He's been different since you arrived. Happier, more settled." The observation hung between us, laden with implication. "Alpha." "Alexander," he corrected. "When we're alone, at least." The intimacy of the permission caught me off guard. "Alexander," I amended, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. "I'm grateful for your protection, but come spring, Emma and I should continue our journey. We don't belong here. Don't you?" His golden eyes held mine, intense and searching. "My son has claimed you both as his. The pack sees how he's flourished in your care. Even Lydia, who questions everything, admits your presence has been beneficial. Theo is a child who's latched onto the first maternal figure he's encountered," I argued gently. "It's natural, but temporary. He'll forget us when we're gone." Alexander's expression darkened. "You underestimate his attachment, and perhaps other attachments forming as well." My heart stuttered at the implication, heat rising in my cheeks. "You can't mean—" "I know my own mind, Alara," he interrupted, his voice low and certain. "And increasingly, I know my heart as well. I've watched you these past weeks. Your gentleness with Theo, your skill in the healing rooms, your quiet dignity despite those who would diminish you. These are qualities any pack would value, any alpha would treasure." I stood abruptly, needing distance from the dangerous pull of his words, his presence. "I was rejected," I reminded him, touching the mark at my throat. "Cast out as unworthy. Your pack would never accept—" "My pack follows my lead," he cut in, rising as well but not approaching. "And the mark of rejection can be overwritten by a true claiming. It's rare, but within my power as Alpha King, the possibility left me speechless." Such a thing was the stuff of Omega legends, a second chance, a true bond to replace a broken one. But legends rarely addressed practicalities. "What of Katerina?" I asked. "The alliances her family expects, the political advantages of a proper match." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "You think like a beta already, considering pack politics. I think like someone who's already had one life destroyed by the ambitions of others," I corrected, more sharply than I'd intended. Far from taking offense, Alexander nodded. "A fair caution, but I'm not your former mate, Alara.
When I make a choice, I stand by it. Regardless of who might object, the winter solstice arrived, bringing with it the Northern Pack's most sacred celebration, the Night of Long Shadows. The fortress hummed with preparation. Every member assigned tasks to ready the great hall for the ceremony and feast that would follow. Even Emma and I were drawn into the excitement, with Helena insisting we participate fully as temporary pack members. "It's the one night when past, present, and future blur," she explained, as we hung evergreen boughs studded with red berries. "When we honor those who came before and welcome what's to come." I found myself looking forward to the celebration, despite the complications that had arisen since my conversation with Alexander in the winter garden. We had maintained a careful distance in the days that followed, both seemingly needing time to consider the implications of his words. I caught him watching me often, his expression thoughtful, but he made no further declarations, allowing me space I hadn't realized I needed. The memory of rejection ran deep, a wound not fully healed despite the months that had passed. Trust came harder now, especially trust in an alpha's intentions, no matter how honorable they might seem. And Alexander was not just any alpha, but a king, his responsibilities extending beyond personal desire to the welfare of an entire kingdom. "You're overthinking again," Helena observed, breaking into my reflections as she handed me another garland to hang. "I can practically hear the wheels turning in that head of yours." I managed a small smile, force of habit. "Life's been complicated." "Life's always complicated," she replied pragmatically. "Doesn't mean you shouldn't embrace the good when it finds you." Whether the good referred specifically to Alexander or more generally to our improving circumstances, I wasn't sure. Either way, her words resonated as I finished my task and went to collect Emma from Mira, who had been watching her while I helped with preparations. I found my daughter wide awake and bright-eyed, dressed in a tiny ceremonial gown of deep green velvet with silver embroidery around the hem. A silver circlet rested on her fair hair, an unmistakable symbol of royal favor that sent a jolt of alarm through me. "Who gave her this?" I asked Mira, gently touching the gleaming metal. The girl looked confused by my concern. "The Alpha brought it himself, miss. Said it was tradition for pups celebrating their first Long Shadow night to wear family tokens." Family tokens. The significance wasn't lost on me, nor would it be lost on the pack members who saw Emma thus adorned. Alexander was making a statement, publicly associating my daughter with his royal line in a way that couldn't be misinterpreted. Before I could decide how to respond, Theo burst into the room, resplendent in ceremonial attire that matched the color and styling of Emma's gown. A larger version of her circlet crowned his dark hair, and excitement radiated from him in palpable waves. "Elara, look at baby Emma. We match. Papa says that means we're family now, and family always stays together, especially on Long Shadow night." His innocent declaration hit with the force of a physical blow, bringing home the reality of what was happening. Alexander wasn't merely offering protection or even a personal attachment. He was systematically creating a familial bond between us, using his son's natural affection and pack tradition to weave us into the fabric of Northern royal life. I should have been angry at the presumption, but looking at Theo's joyful face and Emma's answering smile as she reached for the boy she'd come to recognize as a constant presence, I found my resistance wavering. This was what I'd wanted for my daughter, not just survival, but belonging, a place where she was valued and loved. Could I deny her that, out of fear or pride or lingering wounds from the past? The question hung suspended in my mind as we made our way to the great hall for the ceremony. The massive space had been transformed. Hundreds of candles casting dancing shadows across walls now hung with ancient tapestries depicting pack history. A throne-like chair positioned at the head of the hall awaited the Alpha, with smaller seats arranged nearby for his immediate circle. Pack members filed in according to rank and lineage, taking their traditional places in a formation that had likely remained unchanged for generations. I hesitated at the entrance, uncertain where we belonged in this carefully ordered hierarchy, until Lydia appeared at my side. "The Alpha requests your presence on the dais," she informed me, her tone carefully neutral, though I detected a hint of resignation beneath it. With the children, the significance of the placement, at Alexander's right hand, in full view of the entire pack, sent a ripple of anxiety through me. "Is that appropriate?" We're guests, not family. Lydia's shrewd eyes studied me. Are you not? The children are dressed as siblings. You wear the pendant of a blood ally, and the Alpha's intentions grow clearer with each passing day. She sighed softly. I opposed this initially, but I serve the pack first and always. If you bring stability to our Alpha and joy to our prince, my personal reservations matter little. It was as close to approval as I was likely to get from the proud Beta. I inclined my head in acknowledgement, then followed her lead to the raised platform where Theo already waited, bouncing with barely contained excitement. The ceremony began with Alexander's entrance, the pack rising in unison as he moved through their midst toward the dais. He wore formal attire that emphasized his powerful build, dark leather and silver accents, a heavy cloak draped over broad shoulders, his own circlet a simple band that nonetheless commanded instant respect. His eyes found mine as he approached, a silent question in their amber depths. I didn't look away, allowing something of my inner conflict to show. His expression softened almost imperceptibly in understanding before he turned to address the waiting pack. The ritual that followed was ancient and beautiful, stories of pack ancestors recited from memory, traditional songs that echoed against stone walls, ceremonial gifts exchanged between family groups to symbolize unity through the dark winter months. Throughout it all, Emma remained contentedly in my arms, while Theo pressed close to my side, occasionally whispering explanations of particularly important moments. When the formal ceremony concluded, servants brought forth the feast, platters of roasted meats, winter vegetables preserved from the autumn harvest, sweet breads and pastries decorated with crystallized berries. Wine flowed freely, and the atmosphere gradually shifted from solemn observance to celebration as musicians took up traditional tunes. It's time for the dance of new beginnings, Theo informed me, as the first notes of a particular melody drifted across the hall. Papa always leads it. Watch! Sure enough, Alexander rose from his seat and moved to the center of the hall. The pack formed a circle around him, anticipation evident in their posture. When he extended his hand toward the dais, it took me a moment to realize he was beckoning me to join him. Shock kept me rooted in place until Lydia appeared, smoothly taking Emma from my arms. Go, she urged quietly. To refuse would cause offense on this night of all nights. On unsteady legs, I made my way to Alexander, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes tracking my movement. When I reached him, he took my hand in his, the warmth of his skin seeping into mine, oddly reassuring despite my nerves. I should have warned you, he murmured, his voice pitched for my ears alone. But some traditions cannot be explained, only experienced. Before I could respond, the music shifted, and he drew me into the steps of a dance unlike any I'd known in my former pack. It began slowly, formally, partners circling each other without touching beyond our joined hands. Gradually, the tempo increased, the movements becoming more intricate, more intimate, until I was breathless from both exertion and proximity. Other couples joined, the dance expanding to include more of the pack, but my awareness remained fixed on Alexander. The careful strength in his guidance, the respect evident in each movement that invited rather than commanded my participation. When the final notes faded, we stood closer than we'd begun, his eyes holding mine with unmistakable intent. There are things I must say to you, he said softly. Not here, not now, but soon. I nodded, unable to form words around the emotion tightening my throat. He escorted me back to the dais, where Theo waited with barely contained excitement, and Emma, remarkably, had fallen asleep in Lydia's capable arms despite the noise and activity. The remainder of the celebration passed in a blur of food, music, and increasingly boisterous pack interactions as the night deepened. When Emma began to fuss, overtired and overwhelmed by the stimulation, Alexander personally escorted us back to our chambers, Theo trailing sleepily behind us. At my door, the boy surprised me by throwing his arms around my waist in a fierce hug. This was the best Long Shadow night ever, he declared, because you and Emma were here. Alexander's eyes met mine over his son's head, something vulnerable and hopeful in his gaze that resonated with an answering emotion in my own heart. Sleep well, little wolf, I told Theo, smoothing his hair affectionately. Tomorrow brings a new day. Once alone with Emma, I paced our chamber, too restless for sleep despite physical exhaustion. The events of the night had shifted something fundamental inside me. The careful barriers I'd constructed around my heart, developing cracks I wasn't sure I wanted to repair. A soft knock at the door sometime later pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Alexander, still in his ceremonial attire but without the formal cloak and circlet. "I saw the light," he explained. "I thought you might still be awake." I stepped back to allow him entry, noting he left the door partially open, a gesture of respect for propriety that paradoxically made his presence feel more intimate, more intentional. "Theo is finally asleep," he said, glancing toward the connected room where Emma also slumbered. "He fought it valiantly, afraid he might miss something important." "It was a beautiful ceremony," I offered. "Thank you for including us." Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape bathed in moonlight. "It wasn't mere inclusion, Alara. It was acknowledgement of what I believe has been evident since the night you found my son in the storm." He turned to face me fully. "Some would call it fate. I prefer to think of it as recognition." "Recognition of what?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Of belonging," he said simply. Theo recognized it instantly, as children often do, seeing truth unburdened by past hurts or politics. I took longer, perhaps, but the certainty has only grown. He stepped closer, stopping when still an arm's length separated us. "The question is whether you feel it too." The directness of the question deserved equal honesty in return. "I'm afraid," I admitted. "Not of you, but of trusting again. Of building a life that could be taken away." "I understand fear," he said quietly. "After Theo's mother died, I thought I would never open myself to such vulnerability again, that I would be Alpha King first, and nothing else, ruling justly but from a place of detachment." A sad smile touched his lips. "Theo needed more than a king for a father. And I've come to realize I need more than a crown to make this kingdom truly mine." The raw honesty in his words reached past my defenses, touching the part of me that had never stopped hoping despite rejection and hardship. "What are you asking of me, Alexander?" "Time," he answered. "Time to heal. To know this place and these people as your own. To let me prove through actions rather than words that what I offer isn't charity or obligation, but choice." He paused, then added with quiet certainty, "And when you're ready, if you're ready, a place as my equal, Theo's mother, Emma's protector. Not a replacement for what was lost, but something new we build together." The promise in those words, the respect inherent in their patience, loosened something that had been knotted inside me since the day of my rejection. I didn't speak immediately, letting the truth of my own feelings rise to the surface. "Emma deserves stability," I said finally. "A home, a family, a future secure from the vagaries of pack politics." "Yes," he agreed, "as do you. And Theo deserves a mother who will love him as her own, who sees his gentle heart as strength rather than weakness." Alexander's eyes never left mine. "Yes." I took a deep breath, my grandmother's pendant warm against my skin as if lending me her courage across the years. "I can't promise everything all at once. Trust comes slowly to me now." "I don't ask for everything," he said. "Only the chance to earn it, day by day." In that moment, looking at this powerful man who had found humility enough to ask rather than command, I made my choice, not from desperation or necessity, but from the first stirrings of something that felt remarkably like hope. "Then yes," I said softly. "We'll stay. Not as guests or obligations, but as family in the making." The smile that transformed his face then was unlike any expression I'd seen from him before. Open and joyful, in a way that stripped away the stern Alpha King and revealed simply Alexander, a man who had found something he feared lost forever. He extended his hand, palm up in the traditional gesture of pack acceptance. When I placed my smaller hand in his, he raised it slowly to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that sealed our agreement more powerfully than formal words. "Welcome home, Ilara," he murmured against my skin. "At last." As moonlight spilled across the stone floor, and Emma slept peacefully in the next room, I felt the last shadows of my rejection begin to fade. We had survived the wilderness, my daughter and I, finding not merely shelter but belonging in this northern kingdom with its fierce alpha king and his gentle-hearted son. My grandmother's pendant had guided me home after all, to a place I never knew to seek, and a future I hadn't dared to imagine. Spring would come with new beginnings, but here in the heart of winter, warmth had already found us.